very warm greetings everyone. Welcome to the series of Introduction to Environmental Economics. In this we have been talking about environmental regulation. Today's lecture is on tradable permits and carbon credit markets, part 1. The learning objectives of this lecture would be to comprehend the framework of tradable permits as an economic incentive under the environmental regulation, to differentiate between command and control and tradable permits, to understand cap and trade concept of marketable permit system, to visualize the market equilibrium achieved under marketable permit system, to comprehend the carbon credit market and their functioning, and finally to visualize the advantages and challenges related to the carbon credit market systems. Now, one has to understand the environmental regulation. There are two categories which have been proposed for the environmental regulation. One category is command and control category, the other one is market-based instruments. Under the command and control category, we have several regulations. Emission limits are specified, then pollution control equipments are specified, stationary sources like air and water both, they are specified, and then mobile sources are also specified like automobiles. So under these prescriptions, one has to, under a variety of points, the prescriptions have been laid down by the regulator. On the other hand, market-based system, market-based instruments, there are several instruments which can be applied. Pollution incentives like taxes, air, water, and at air water sources also you can create a permit system, and then a tradable permit system can be visualized. There is another provision is switching over towards the natural gas or renewable energy system that is considered as energy transition that can be incorporated under market-based instruments. Carbon taxes, subsidies, they all come under the market-based systems. So therefore, the entire gambit of environmental regulation can be visualized in two different categories: command and control category and the market-based instrument category. Command and control is in short called as CNC, and market-based instrument is called as MBI. Thus, we can just continue talking about the command and control policies. How do they differ from market-based policies? Command and control policies are also known as regulatory instruments which are mandated and they are specific to some action and they reduce pollution. Market-based instruments such as MBI, which is known as MBI, they create financial incentives to encourage pollution reduction. So there is a fundamental difference between the command and control and market-based instrument. CNC is a top-down approach where a polluter is being prescribed to do certain actions and certain things prescribed by the regulator, while market-based instrument gives a leverage to the polluter to settle down with certain ways and methods of reducing pollution. CNC policy often involves regulations, directives and permits, providing lesser flexibility to the organizations or businesses, while MBI, which is market-based instruments like taxes and tradable permits, they offer businesses a greater flexibility and can internalize external cost. CNC policies, they prescribe specific rules and standards, often with penalties which are imposed for non-compliance. While examples, if you take examples, they are included like regulations mandating specific technologies for or emission standards which are prescribed by the regulator or the policymaker. CNC can be effective for addressing specific environmental problems and they can be implemented quickly. It can be It can give lesser flexibility and may not always be the most cost effective method of achieving environmental goals. So one cannot guarantee cost effectiveness or efficiency when it comes to CNC. CNC has an advantage of meeting up the targets in a short period of time, and it can be implemented by the policymakers quickly. However, the market-based instruments, they take little larger time and longer time to settle down with the emissions and the price of emissions. Government across the nations, they design environmental regulations and allocate tradable rights to emit pollution, which is considered one of the measures to reduce emissions. Tradable rights to pollute are widely referred to as command and control. Under command and control method, there are two options: setting uniform emission limits, which are called as permits or allowances, and secondly, specifying the pollution control equipments. So these are two ways in which CNC can be activated or implemented. On one side, there is a uniform emission limit that is prescribed by the policymakers. On the other side, they specify the pollution control equipments and ways of reducing. Compliance costs typically vary or differ greatly among various sources. As we talked about water sources, air sources, transport sources. So there are various sources which are the costs are different. They can be differentiated based on which source the emissions are coming from. So the compliance cost also differs typically with the dependent on the source specific emission. Depending on the age, also the technology, characteristic and operating conditions, they all decide the compliance cost. As a result, aggregate abatement cost under the command and control approaches are likely to be much greater than what is required to be. So the abatement cost, that is the cost incurred in reducing pollution when it comes to CNC, command and control approach, it comes to be substantially high as compared to the other method of regulation. MBI, the market-based instrument, are economic incentives. They use the economic incentives to encourage the environmental behavior of the entities or the stakeholders. MBI is a more lenient and a feasible method of creating an environmental regulation. Examples are taxes on the pollution, tradable permits, under which we consider cap and trade systems, and subsidies for environmentally friendly technologies. A carbon tax on emission from electricity generation also comes under this market-based instrument. MBI, which is market-based instrument, can be more cost-effective than CNC policies, that is command and control policies. They allow businesses to choose the most efficient way of complying, because here the feasibility and the flexibility is there with the stakeholder or the polluter. It can also lead to distributional impact and potentially burdening the certain sectors or the individuals. MBI may be more complex to implement and require careful design to ensure that they effectively address the environmental problem or the issue of the nation. By estimating a price on the pollutant emission, either directly through the taxes or indirectly through a market of tradable rights, which are called as permits or allowances. So within the gambit of MBI, one can approach the regulation in 2-3 ways. One way is issuing the permits to pollute, and they are tradable. So one can trade those permits according to the requirement. And second is to impose a tax, which is generally called as carbon tax or Pigouvian tax. Market-based policies they equate the marginal abatement cost across the entities or across the stakeholders, polluters, rather than emission levels. So what they are going to do is market-based approach is a price-efficient approach where the costs are taken into account and costs are equalized based on the principle of marginal equalization principle, and thereby one can see that with this principle you achieve the most efficient outcome in terms of efficiency, cost efficiency with the minimum cost possible. Under this class of tradable permits, one of the very commonly used tradable permit, which is called as cap and trade policy, is one of the commonly mechanism that has been adopted across the nations, and it is most popular method of carbon tradable permits, cap and trade policy or cap and trade system. The emission reduction credit, or it is also called as emission reduction credit system or offset systems. MBI, which is a market-based environmental policy instrument, it includes both the quantity mechanism such as the cap and trade policy or the offset mechanism and the pollution charges such as the emission taxes and deposit refund system. So one can see that MBI has again two types of approaches. One side, it is a quantity mechanism that is addressed in terms of the quantity of emission emitted, total quantity emitted. Under this you have cap and trade. So cap and trade policy takes care of the quantity of the emissions. Offset system also takes care of the quantity. On the other hand, the pollution charges, which are the fine or the fees or the tax, they take care of the prices of pollution or prices of emission. Emission taxes, deposit refund system, they all belong to the price side, that is pollution charges side. So MBI in a way addresses both the quantity of emissions and the price of emissions. There are various examples one can quote related to cap and trade system implemented in US. US Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, it implemented the leaded gasoline phase down in 1980s. Then the sulfur dioxide allowance trading program, which was undertaken under the Act of Clean Air Act Amendment of 1990. There's another example of cap and trade policy implemented. So several countries have already experienced cap and trade policies, and most of the time we've seen that the outcome of these implementations, of regulation implementations, have been complying and they are positive. Nitrogen oxide trading in the eastern United States is another example. Regional clean air incentive markets were created in the southern California. Regional greenhouse gas initiatives were taken in the northeast United States. Another example, very famous example, is California's AB 32 cap and trade system. And finally, the European Union emission trading system, which is called as EU ETS, is a remarkable example of cap and trade policy permit system being adopted. Now, marketable permits, trading, what do you understand by trading under the marketable permits? Trading induces a price or a value on the permit to pollute. So, permit to pollute is kind of a certification or certificate which allows you to emit or pollute. So, by trading, you settle down with the price on that permit, and thus causing the firms to view polluting as an expensive activity. It's a system that instigates and inspires and encourages people to understand the value of reducing pollution. Less pollution in turn would mean fewer permits, and therefore it would mean that lesser amount, lesser pollution basically means that you have given a value for reducing the pollution. So permit thus gets a value by trading. The method of trading brings in the intrinsic value to the permit, and there are opportunity cost of emitting the firms. So for emitting the pollution or emitting emissions basically gains an opportunity cost while trading. Firms can sell more permits and by not emitting. So the incentive of selling the permit would mean that you have extra permits to emit, but you are not emitting, and therefore you have extra permits to sell. Therefore, you will earn profits by selling the permits. It means you are not emitting. A marketable permit system is often called as cap and trade system. The regulator sets a cap on overall emissions, and it allows the trading among the polluters to determine who emits what. So, overall permission is being or cap has been laid down by the regulator, and within that cap one can trade between the various firms and entities or polluters and stakeholders. There are, suppose we take a example and a framework to understand how the system works, marketable permit system works. We create a model where there are two polluters. Suppose there are 100 units of permits to be in total. There are 100 units of permits basically means there are 100 units in where you can pollute or emit. Suppose each firm gets equal permit, and that is 50 permits, because there are two firms, so each firm gets 50 permits. Now, marginal savings from polluting function, that is marginal saving function, how do we describe that? Suppose a firm, marginal saving function, which is defined as the savings of a firm incurs or accumulates by not emitting. So suppose you see the graph on the screen, and where you can see there are two firms, firm 1 and firm 2, which are placed on the vertical axis. On the left hand side you have firm 1 and a firm 2 on the right hand side, and the graphs which you can see are the downward sloping graphs of marginal savings from pollution. More you increase, on the horizontal axis we are plotting the number of permits. More permits you buy means basically there is a cost you're increasing to pollute, and if you're increasing more permits means you are intending to emit more, and once you emit more, obviously the savings which you can make by not emitting, that reduces. So the mere shape of the graph, that is a downward sloping marginal savings curve, is basically negative. So both the firms have their marginal savings curves downward sloping, and as given in the model that we have total of 100 units of permits which are divided equally between firm 1 and firm 2. Firm 1 and firm 2 are placed at 50-50 emission permits. So from here they want to trade, and there is a point at which the marginal savings curves equate at a point where at P star where the marginal savings of both the firms are equated. The permits are plotted horizontally, and vertically we can see the savings function, marginal savings firm function, and firm 1 is located on the left hand side corner of the graph, and the permits which are used by the firm are measured from left to right. Firm 2 is located on the right hand side corner of the graph, and the permits which are used by firm 2 to emit are measured from the right to left. Initially, both the firms are located at 50-50 permits. The total firm permits, which are 100, are located at the right hand side corner of the firm 1. The total permits 100 are located on the left hand side for firm 2. Marginal saving function for both the firms are downward sloping, which says that for each additional permit bought, the additional or the marginal saving MS from emitting reduces. That the savings, the marginal additional savings which a firm can accumulate from emitting reduces. As the firm incur cost in emitting, so the marginal savings decline. That is natural from the understanding of downward sloping marginal savings curve. And the marginal savings for firm 1 is MS1 and marginal savings for firm 2 is MS2. The marginal savings for both the firms, they meet or intersect at a point E. At point where the marginal savings are equalized, firm 1 holds E star, and while the firm 2 holds 100 minus E star. The firms will continue to trade with the initial permits, that is 50, allocated at point, and they reach finally to a point of equilibrium, that is E. Equilibrium at which the marginal savings are equalized is considered as point E, and that is at that particular point is called as a permit price, which is P star. Equilibrium permit are E star, equilibrium permit are E star and held by firm 1, while the equilibrium firm permits held by firm 2 are 100 minus E star. The price that permits attain is P star. This is a trading model between firm 1 and firm 2. A hypothetical model where we have tried to visualize how the permits attain the price and what is the equilibrium level at which permits are sold, the quantity of permits sold. It is important to note that the emission fee of price P star would achieve the same outcome with an emission fee which is P star. In the earlier lectures we have talked about emission fee. However, the framework in which we talk about emission fee is different from tradable permits. However, the price which they attain is going to be same. Here we are less sure of the quantity of pollution. With the marketable permits, we exactly know how much is the pollution, while less sure of the marginal cost of control of pollution. It is important to know that market permit system allows us to ensure that we exactly know how much is the pollution being generated, because we settle down with an equilibrium permits, while we are not very sure of the marginal cost of control. So this was regarding the permit system and how the permit system is useful when it comes to market-based instruments, policies of regulations of environmental control. Now we move on to the carbon credit markets. Carbon credit market is a mechanism that enables the trading of the emission permits, also known as carbon credits, which represent the right to emit a certain amount of greenhouse gases. These markets aim to reduce the emission by putting a price on the carbon pollution, incentivizing the firms or the companies to reduce their emissions or purchase the credits from which they have reduced theirs, from those who have reduced theirs. So basically, by reducing emissions, you earn credits and then you trade them. Carbon market aims to reduce the GHGs, which are called as greenhouse gas emissions, and enabling the trading of emission units, which are called as carbon credits, and which in the form of the certification or certificates representing the emission reduction. So by reducing emission, you earn the certificates of reducing it. And these certificates are then, they can be traded in the market. Trading enables the entities that can reduce emissions at a lower cost to be paid to do so by the higher cost emitters. So higher cost emitters, it can be used to equalize and efficiently reduce the pollution in a better, efficient manner. We continue talking about the carbon credit market after a short break. Thank you so much.